Tra-la-la!
Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. Let me start this off by saying that I love Captain Underpants. When I was a kid back in the early 2000s, the books by Dave Pilkey were my jam. From The Adventures of Captain Underpants to Captain Underpants and the Big Bad Battle of the Bionic Booger Boy Part 2, The Revenge of the Ridiculous Robo-Boogers, along with the extra chunky Book So Fun and The Adventures of Super Diaper Baby. I know there are more afterwards, but I stopped reading them after the 7th book. But looking back at them now, they were actually some really good kids' books. Of course, it has its sense of immature humor, but it also mixes some clever jokes that, even as an adult, it's rather impressive that they can be pretty smart and witty at times. That, and the addition of being interactive, do give the books an extra level of fun to them. I think it's safe to say that they played a good part of my childhood and could explain my style of humor. Long story short, this review will be in the perspective of someone who grew up with the books. But now that DreamWorks Animation is snapping their fingers at Mr. Krupp, will they make a film that will honor truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cottony? Or is the Flipperama the only type of animation suited for the superhero? Let's find out. The story. Allow me to begin this off with the connections it has with the original books. I'd say it's half faithful, half original. On one side, there are some elements that it would have to either change or add in order to make this feel like one entire story that would flow naturally. On the other hand, it mostly uses the first and fourth book in order to build the structure of the plot itself, along with taking elements from the second to fill in the gaps. However, for the most part, it does stay true to the books. Even with the elements that are not from them, they could still be recognized as components that would fit into Dave Pilkey's works. What would combine everything together, and the most important part of the feature, is the tone. Out of all the movies from big-name animation studios that I've seen, this has to be the one that takes itself seriously the least, or even doesn't at all. I mean, with a goofy animation style and a title that's literally called Captain Underpants, there's no way it could get away with a moment that would be down to earth. So what it did is just go to the max with the silliness, down to the point where the audience would have no choice but to turn off their brains and enjoy the ride. Like in the books, the tone, along with the humor, is a mixture of the childish and the witty. The immature aspects would come from a variety of toilet humor and the over-the-top situations the characters would get into. As for its cleverness, that would be its use of breaking the fourth wall and the moments when George and Harold would interact with the audience or acknowledge what the movie is doing.
Wow, that's a lot of pranks.
Yeah, when it's cut all together like that, you really get a sense of the scope.
Some of those must have been really hard to pull off.
And dangerous, like that tiger.
Oh, that tiger was crazy.
It is possible, though, that it can get into a bit too much of its own goofiness, where some scenes can feel like filler and don't have much to a point to the plot. It's absolutely ridiculous, sure, but at least the story knows how to have fun with it. The animation. This is a rather interesting case for DreamWorks. Instead of being directly animated at the studio itself, it was outsourced at Micros Images in Montreal, Canada, in order to cut down costs. The result that came from it is a look that's far different than any other DreamWorks film. Then again, that's what this movie exactly needs. The goal of the visuals is to translate the art style of Pilkey into a three-dimensional world. It's a little bit similar to what Blue Sky did with the Peanuts movie, except this one doesn't try to have a 2D look. Even if it does use defined textures on the characters' hair, clothes, and more, the designs remain true to how they are in the original books and keep them as simple as possible with little lines for eyes and a little round nose. As for the character animation, considering the style it has to work with, it has no choice but to go cartoony with it. It doesn't go too over the top with characters waving their rubber hose arms like Olive Oyl from Popeye, but it's more like it would scrap all laws of anatomy and their arms and legs would curve if they want to bend them. However, what the animators would do with the characters does bring in the excitement with the action, including the scenes when Captain Underpants would go out and try to fight crime.
Listen, let's not be punching people though, because
Hold it! Here, let me help.
Oh!
You're welcome, madam.
wow, he is super dumb.
The only downside I would give to the animation, though, is that the backgrounds do look a little dull and plain. There's nothing special about the movie's depiction of Pequot, Ohio, other than a generic city and the elementary school. All the special stuff visually would come from the characters and the inventions from Melvin and Professor Poopy Pants. Actually, let me rephrase that. The special stuff visually would come from the kids' drawings turned into 2D animation, and even one scene that's completely depicted through sock puppets. Like if it were from George and Harold themselves, the animation knew how to take those pages from the books and let it go crazy into a computer-generated world. The characters. Very similar to Captain Underpants himself, the characters are fun to watch and can give out a great laugh. But it seems to be stuck in its own little world that they would forget to deliver more than just who they are. The biggest issue with the cast is that they're mostly one-dimensional and they would just present only one trait of their personality, and that's all you have to know about them. The movie could devote 5 minutes into a backstory to give a bit of depth, but that's pretty much it. But on to the people of the film, you have the main characters outside of the captain, George Beard and Harold Hutchins. Oh, by the way, George is the one with the tie and the flat top, while Harold is the one with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. One of the key themes of this movie is their friendship, and how it seems to be on the line when Mr. Krupp would have to send them to separate classes. They're both seen as best friends and also pranksters who want to live up their time in school and actually have some fun when everything else looks like the kid equivalent of jail. Speaking of Krupp, he's the mean old principal that is against all that George and Harold stands for and would have such evil delight on their misery. However, the movie does add a bit more flavor to him to show a lonely side to explain about his grumpy nature, including having a crush on the lunch lady. When he would turn into Captain Underpants, it's like if he jumped straight out of the comics that the kids made. He would act exactly like an over-the-top superhero, but would have no sense on how the real world functions. And then you have the villain, straight from the 4th book, Professor Poopy Pants. Unlike in the book though, Poopy Pants would immediately come out as evil right from the start, with only one scene that would explain how people laughing at his name made him snap into madness.
And for the last few years, you've been in a very dark place, and your title was Revenge Seeker?
Yeah, that's basically what I've been up to.
His goal is to get rid of the world's laughter so his name wouldn't be laughed at anymore, with the help of the snobbish teacher's pet with no sense of humor, Melvin Sneedly. The characters are fun to watch and be around with, but as characters for a movie, they don't offer a lot for an entire feature. This is one of the stupidest and most immature animated features ever created, and that's what makes it so enjoyable. Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, takes the books of Dave Pilkey and turned them into a fun-filled adventure with so much goofiness and laughs, creative use of animation, and some likable characters. Of course, if you were or still a fan of the books, then this is a must-watch. However, if you're looking for something to just turn off your brain and enjoy something that would make no sense whatsoever, then this film is also for you. I mean, sure, it's not the best animated film of the decade or even one of the studio's greatest hits, but I will say though that this has to be the funniest DreamWorks film in a long time. It was certainly a movie that not only satisfied me, but also what would have satisfied my childhood.
Just let me coach ya, show you about.
Yeah, we should probably go get him.